Question: what do all of these people have in common? Bishop Basil of Caesarea, who successfully campaigned in the 4th century to have infanticide and abortion outlawed in the Roman Empire, until that point a common practice. St. Chrysostom, who worked with Basil to build the first orphanages and hospitals in the Roman Empire. Theodosius and Arrhenius, who ended gladiatorial shows in the Roman Empire, those barbaric games where human beings would be killed for sport and entertainment in front of baying crowds. Constantine the Great, who outlawed paedophilia in the Roman Empire, again something that was common until that point. St. Augustine, who established the UK's first charity. Raher, who established Britain's first hospital. Florence Nightingale, the founder of modern nursing. The missionary William Carey, who successfully campaigned to end the practice of sati in India, where the wives of deceased husbands were expected to jump onto his funeral pyre and burn themselves alive along with him. Captain Thomas Coram, who established the first orphanage in the UK. King Altheston, who established the first concept of care homes for the aged in the UK. Sir Robert Peel, who was the first to introduce child labour laws in the UK to ban the exploitation of children. Martin Luther, who established the first public schools in Germany, and who was a key figure in reforming the church as well, of course. Friedrich Froebel, who established the idea of kindergarten. Charles-Michel de Lopez, Thomas Gallaudet, and Laurent Clerc, who developed sign language and established the first schools for the deaf so that the deaf could receive some kind of education. Louis Braille, who established a method by which the blind could also read and also be educated. Robert Raikes, who established Sunday schools so that poor children could receive at least some education at least one day a week. Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, who established the world's first university in Bologna in Italy. John Harvard, who established the first university in the United States. The barons who compelled King John to sign the Magna Carta, which became the bedrock of Western ideas of liberty and justice. And then finally, William Wilberforce, who successfully campaigned for the abolition of the slave trade in the British Empire and who successfully reformed British society. Does anyone know what the common thread is that links all of those people together? If you answered they were all Christians, they were all Christians who were compelled by their faith to reform society for the glory of God and for the blessing of all living things, then you'd be correct. They were all Christians. And there were hundreds, if not thousands more, that I could have mentioned. Christians who, all throughout history, in their own way and in their own time, reformed their society and who did something to make the world a little brighter. Christians who left the world a little better off for them having been here. And we are now all the beneficiaries of all of those reforms that those Christians made during their lives. Even though we live hundreds of years, if not thousands of years after some of them, we're all still benefiting from all of the reforms that those Christians made. I want to focus on one name in particular, and it's that of William Wilberforce. People who've been a long-time follower of this channel will not be surprised to discover that I want to focus on William Wilberforce because I've often spoken throughout the years of just how inspirational I find him as a Christian. I believe that William Wilberforce, in particular, has left us a blueprint for how we reform and save Western civilization in our time. I believe that Wilberforce has shown us the way to do it. His methods worked in his day, and I believe that if we replicate them, it will work in our day as well. And let me explain why. Let me just talk a little bit about William Wilberforce and his history. So William Wilberforce was born in the 18th century into a wealthy merchant family. And as he grew into a teenager and not being a Christian and having a lot of money, his life threatened to be frittered away on the temptations that exist for wealthy young men of any era, really. Gambling, vice, alcohol, girls, etc. However, in his early 20s, he became an evangelical Christian and he immediately turned his back on all of those vices. In fact, he regretted the time that he'd already wasted on them in his short life up until that point. And as he looked ahead at his life now as a Christian, and as he wondered how to make the best use of his time for God, at first he thought he should commit his life to prayer and private contemplation. He was going to become a kind of recluse, it seems, who just spent his time studying and praying and worshipping in private. That was his initial concept of what a Christian life might look like. However, as he studied the Bible a bit more, he began to realize that the Bible actually calls Christians to action as well as private contemplation. And he said, surely the principles of Christianity lead to action as well as meditation. He wrote this in his book. I've forgotten what it's called. True Christianity, I think it might be called. Now, with action in mind, he looks around at his society and he saw there was a lot to do. There was a lot of social ills. There was a lot of problems in 18th century Britain. In fact, in many ways, his society was very much like our one. It's remarkable the parallels that existed between 18th century Britain and 21st century Britain and the West as a whole. Firstly, the first parallel is that there was a lot of social problems in those days, a lot of vice, a lot of degeneracy, a lot of problems that needed fixing. Secondly, it was like our society because the mainline churches, especially the Anglican Church, instead of standing up for Jesus in culture and trying to do something to reform culture with Christian values, the Anglican Church was just conforming to culture. It was just falling in with the culture of the time. It was a waste of space. Again, unfortunately, a bit like today. And thirdly, it was like our time because true Christianity had been stigmatized in those days. It was considered socially unacceptable in those days to speak too much about Jesus or to be too passionate about your faith in public. And evangelicals were the subject of much contempt and derision and ridicule. So again, very much like today. All of this frustrated Wilberforce because he sees society slipping into sin and darkness and chaos, and he wants to do something to reform it. But he sees that mainline churches are compromised. They're just full of nominal Christians. And he also sees that real Christianity is being mocked and marginalized and pushed to the sides. And he thinks we have to do something about this. The church needs to somehow be spurred into action so that we can reform society and fix all of these social ills. Now, the key is William Wilberforce knows that Jesus Christ is the only solution for his culture. He says, I must confess equally boldly that my own solid hopes for the well-being of my country depend not so much on her navies and armies, nor on the wisdom of her rulers, nor on the spirit of her people, as on the persuasion that she still contains many who love and obey the gospel of Christ. I believe that their prayers may yet prevail. So William Wilberforce, his hope for his nation is not in the armies. It's not in the navy. It's not in the leaders. It's not even in the spirit of the people. Wilberforce knows that Jesus Christ is going to be the only hope for the future of his nation. Again, this is something that we need to take on board for our time. Wilberforce notices something that many people are just beginning to notice again in our time. That when Christianity goes into decline in the nation, society declines along with it. But when Christianity grows and flourishes and prevails in the society, society improves and flourishes along with it, making life better for all. He said, whenever Christianity, whose standards or morals are governed by an internal force, the Holy Spirit, has prevailed, the general standard of morals rises to the highest elevation. As morality increases and men improve, happiness then flourishes. Like a river, Christianity begins its path silently and peacefully, leaving beauty and comfort at each cottage. It fertilizes regions and enriches kingdoms as it progresses. I love that mental image that as Christianity spreads across the land, it beautifies, it waters, it fertilizes, it causes things to grow and to flourish. It causes people to come alive and brings joy and happiness as it spreads across the land. And Wilberforce understands it's the job of Christians to be the hands and feet and voice of Christ in the world, proclaiming the gospel and taking it across the land into the four corners. Therefore, Wilberforce said that all Christians should constantly ask themselves these two questions. Firstly, am I using my time, money, body, and mental powers so I can give a joyful account of my life to God? So when you get to heaven and stand before God, are you going to be able to say, look, God, you gave me time, money, a body, you gave me powers of mental reasoning. I used all of those things for your glory. Are you going to be able to say that? And second, am I putting into practice my beliefs about God in all things? In other words, what are you currently doing for God's kingdom. You've got to be doing something. He said, no man has a right to be idle. Where is it that in such a world as this, that health and leisure and affluence may not find some ignorance to instruct, some wrong to redress, some want to supply, some misery to alleviate? In other words, if you have health, time and money, or even just one of those things, then you should be using them to do good in the world in Christ's name, for the glory of God and for the blessing of all living things. He said that all Christians should commit themselves firstly to private prayer and to habitual study of the scriptures, and that was very important. In fact, it was extremely important. But secondly, also, just as important, since Christians have an obligation to use all that God gives for the benefit of others, Christians should cheerfully and diligently make it their business to put in motion benevolent and useful activities. This is what I adore about William Wilberforce, his commitment to action. He says we should put in motion benevolent and useful activities. Now, as for his own actions, Wilberforce said, God has set before me two great objects, the suppression of the slave trade and the reformation of manners. Or morals, rather. Manners is the 18th century word for morals. So Wilberforce looked around, as I said before, and he saw a lot of moral evils in his society, a lot of things that were taking hold in his country, and he wanted to do something about it. The greatest aberration of all, of course, in his time was the transatlantic slave trade. That was a horror. But also, there was poverty in 18th century England. There was problems with alcohol and vice, with sexual degeneracy, with prostitution, pornography. The lack of Christian belief in the country troubled him. The mistreatment of animals also troubled him. He was a great lover of animals, and he wanted to do something to make sure that he alleviated all forms of misery for all kinds of life on earth. All kinds of things. He wanted to reform all kinds of things. And again, this is what I absolutely adore about William Wilberforce, that he didn't just see problems. He didn't just report on those problems, nor did he even just believe that Jesus Christ was the hypothetical solution to those problems. The thing I love about Wilberforce is that he was a man of action. He sat down and he formulated a plan for how he was physically going to bring Christianity to bear on his society so that it might improve all of those things, reform society, fertilize and enrich the kingdom. He sat down, he thought about it, he made a plan, he put that plan into action. That's the key. Now, this was William Wilberforce's plan. This is what I think we can replicate in our time. So everybody come together, let's huddle around and let's have a chat about this. Firstly, he networked. He was a naturally outgoing, cheerful and friendly person. All the people that knew him around that time kind of reported on this, on how friendly and outgoing he was and what pleasant company he was. So it was easy for him to make friends. He made important connections. He made friends with William Pitt the Younger, who went on to become Britain's youngest ever prime minister. A lot of people believe he was one of our best ever prime ministers. He also made friends with a lawyer called James Stephen, an itinerant preacher called Thomas Clarkson, Hannah More, who was a playwright and poet, Zachary Macaulay, who was a statistician, Granville Sharp, who was a philanthropist, Henry Venn, who was a clergyman and writer, Henry Thornton, who was an economist and banker. William Wilberforce himself strategically became a member of Parliament. That was the path that he went down. He campaigned for election. I think it was initially in Hull, which is where he was from. And then he went to a larger constituency, which I think was York. But anyway, he campaigned for election. He made it into Parliament. And there he met other politicians like Thomas Fowell Buxton and Edward James Eliot, who were also members of Parliament at the time. Now, all of these people, along with many others, it's got to be said, became known as the Clapham Sect because they were from Clapham in London. That's where they kind of based themselves. All their houses were close together, and apparently they could be seen just kind of wandering in and out of each other's homes, making plans and hatching schemes. They were also called the Clapham Saints by some people, which was kind of, I guess, a derogatory term. Oh, there's the saints over there. It's kind of a derogatory thing. But they came to embrace it. And their mission as the Clapham Sect or the Clapham Saints was to abolish slavery and to reform the morals of society. Now, in order to do this, they formed what they called societies. And each society had a very specific goal to achieve. For example, they set up the Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade to campaign specifically for the abolition of slavery. That was their goal. It was set up in 1787. And the idea was they could pool their areas of expertise, all of their skills, for that one specific end. So Hannah More, with her skills in writing, she could produce pamphlets and tracts. Thomas Clarkson, as a traveling preacher, would go around the country preaching in churches, raising awareness amongst Christians in those churches about the horrors of slavery and explaining why this was incompatible with the Bible. Now, as he went around those churches all over the country, he would distribute Hannah More's pamphlets and tracts so that people could then take home something with them to read over lunch, over their Sunday lunch. William Wilberforce was in Parliament, of course, so he could propose bills and he could present petitions. James Stephen, being a lawyer, could work on the legal side of things and say to William, look, propose this law change in Parliament and it will have this outcome. It will further our cause in this particular way. And he could do all the legal stuff and they could work together. Others were contributing their gifts and their talents as well. And 20 years later, in 1807, it didn't happen immediately, 20 years of effort and working on this, they were eventually successful. The Clapham Sect were responsible for ending the slave trade in the United Kingdom, in the British Empire. And then from there, it kind of went all over the world. They used the same method for all kinds of things. So they established the Society for the Suppression of Vice. And through this, they campaigned against social ills and social evils like gambling and prostitution and pornography and all of those kind of things we talked about before. They established the British and Foreign Bible Society. And the one goal of this society was just to make the Bible as widely available as they could in Britain and across the world. So one thing they had to do, get the Bible into libraries, get it into hotel rooms, into homes. Because if the Bible is easily accessible, people might just pick one up one day. They might just see it lying over there and think, oh, I'll have a little read of that. And if they do, the Holy Spirit then takes over and your work is done. They established the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, which is now known as the RSPCA. It was one of the first, oldest animal welfare charities in the entire world. They kind of started this. They noticed there was lots of stray dogs and miserable animals that were being abused. So they pressed for legal protections against animal cruelty. And they established centers for unwanted animals where they'd be looked after instead of people just throwing them away. They also started the free produce movement, which was aimed to coordinate Christians and people further afield, just anyone who was sympathetic to their cause. So they would all come together to boycott goods produced by slave labor. So if there were any companies who were kind of benefiting, who were profiting from goods that were produced by slave labor, they would boycott them, they would hit them in the pocket, and they would change society that way. So you kind of get the picture. They looked around at society. They found something that was out of alignment with Christian morality. They put together a team and then said, your task is to affect change in that one aspect of society. So work together, pool all of your areas of expertise, all of your gifts and talents, and go and make that one change in society. Make that a little better. Writers, graphic designers, preachers, politicians, lawyers, economists, statisticians, laborers, whatever you can bring to the table, that is your one goal. Work together to make that happen. And through that effort, the Clapham Sect systematically ended slavery, improved education, sent out missionaries, distributed countless Bibles, reformed morals, eased poverty, reformed prisons, improved animal welfare, and generally they did raise public morality. They were incredibly successful. They transformed society. In fact, it was later said of them that the ethos of Clapham became the spirit of the entire age. So this group over here that was kind of derided and people kind of scoffed at them and mocked them for being too spiritual and too religious, they actually changed the spirit of the age. They are largely regarded as being the ones who set the tone for the entire Victorian era to come. And to this day, as I said, we still benefit from many of their reforms, even though it was about 200 years ago or so. This, I want to suggest, is a blueprint for us. I already spoke about this method actually way back in 2012. I spoke about this back in Stay Free 2012, a long time ago. And again in 2016, when I remade Stay Free, I spoke about this method and it didn't really catch on either occasion. But I'm going to try again. Victor Hugo once said that nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. Good ideas need circumstances. And maybe the time just hadn't come yet when I first spoke about this. Maybe we didn't fully understand back then just how bad the slide was going to get in Western civilization, just how dark the future was going to look, and how soon it was going to look dark. Maybe we just didn't see it back then, but maybe we do now. Maybe we're ready to see just how much we need Jesus and just how much we need to spring into action. I hope so, because what needs to happen is this, and I still haven't nailed down the details, to be honest. So this is what I know so far. This is what I can say so far. Firstly, we need to start seeing churches not just as places of prayer and worship and private meditation, which of course they are, but also as operational centers, as bases, as headquarters for societal change, places where we come to coordinate and plan how we're going to go out and change society. Christianity calls us not just to meditation, but to action. And we need to start seeing churches as these operational bases for that action. Secondly, we need to set a mission before each church. If you're a big church, you might be able to subdivide into teams or societies. But before each church or before each team or society or whatever you want to call it, we need to set a specific goal, a target, a mission for that team or church to achieve. We need to say, this is the one thing that you need to work towards and make happen, affect change in society in that one way. And if we all do this, then it soon makes a big change across the whole thing. Thirdly, everyone joins a team that they are passionate about and they pool their gifts and talents and areas of expertise in the pursuit of that goal. Writers, preachers, designers, musicians, lawyers, economists, whatever your gift is, even if all you can offer is your time or your body or your money, everyone works together towards that one goal. Fourthly, network and form connections. Network with other churches, with other organizations, work across denominational lines. We need to put aside any petty differences with other churches. The times are simply too urgent to be squabbling about petty theological differences when we have so much to be getting on with. We need to work together as Christians for the change you want to see in your community, in your town, your city, your state, your nation, your world. Fifthly, we need to work on getting people elected from within the church. That is a key aim of this plan, of this mission. We need to find and raise up and fund Christians who are willing to get into politics. This is something that William Wilberforce understood. If our politicians, our councillors, our governors, our members of parliament are Marxists, are atheists, are Muslim, things are going to get very difficult. But if we get Christians into government, then change becomes a whole lot easier. I saw a video recently where some kind of election was happening in Dearborn, Michigan. I think it was a mayor election, and every candidate was Muslim. I saw another one today where a Muslim was running to become the governor of Georgia. Once it gets to that stage, once Muslims are in positions of power, we're in trouble as Christians and as a society. So we need Christian candidates urgently to step up. As I watched those videos, I couldn't believe it. And I just thought, where are the Christians who are stepping up to at least try to challenge them in these things? Where are they? It's incredible that we've even got to this situation where there are no Christians putting themselves forward for election. We need to try and fix that. 6, we need a kind of Christian march through the institutions, if you will. We've just been speaking about this in recent videos, how the cultural Marxists have made a concerted effort to try to do this. And we need Christians into key areas of influence so that we can start to reverse all of their damage. We need Christians as head teachers, as teachers, or as lecturers on education boards, as judges, as police chiefs, army chiefs, whatever field you are currently working in or plan to work in. Try to get into places where you can shape the culture of that institution, of that organization, and of your society. Maybe you're not that ambitious personally, and you're happy just to be somewhere in the mid-tier, but be ambitious for Christ. Try to get into those places of influence so that you can shape those places and shape your culture. And seventh, and finally, this is the most important one, we need to focus on getting the gospel out in as many ways as possible. The time for sitting on our backsides in pews and doing nothing out there is over. If a week goes by and a church has not made a significant effort to spread the gospel, it's a week wasted. Do this in whatever way you possibly can. The fields are white unto harvest right now. People are longing to hear this, so get out there and give them the gospel. Now, finally, just to finish this video, I'll try to make this quick. Let's go through just a few of the causes that we might want to work on. Every church, every group is going to have to look around and find something in their own context. But here are just some suggestions to get the ball rolling. Number one, how about we try to get halal meat banned in the UK? I don't know about other nations, maybe in your nation as well if you're somewhere else, but I know that halal meat is legal in the UK and it's readily available. And that's a disgrace. In fact, to make life easier for themselves, major companies and brands sometimes use halal meat as a kind of default, which means that many people are eating halal meat without knowing it or because they've got no other option. Like in this example, a recent example at Newcastle University, if you want to eat here, apparently it's all halal. We've got no other option. Now, halal slaughter, unsurprisingly, since it's Islam, is incredibly and unnecessarily cruel. Without stunning the animal or doing anything to nullify the pain, it involves slitting the animal's throat and letting it bleed out in the slowest and most agonizing death possible. As with all things pertaining to Allah, Allah seems to enjoy cruelty. It's unnecessarily cruel. And this is something we can target and get to work on. Let's boycott all the companies who use halal meat. We need people to research and make a comprehensive list of these companies so that we can boycott them. Let's campaign and pressure the government to ban it. We can network on this. We can sort of network with the vegans and the vegetarians. We can get the animal welfare charities involved in this. Let's get this message preached from pulpits, even in the same way that Thomas Clarkson went around the country preaching about the evils of slavery in his time. We can make people aware about the evils of halal slaughter. This is sacrifice to Allah as well. People don't want to eat food that's been sacrificed to Allah in this country. This shouldn't be a part of our culture. So let's go around the churches and make people aware. Many Christians are not aware of what halal meat even is or what it involves. So they just eat it thinking, well, it's just all the same. But it's not. It's been sacrificed and dedicated to Allah. And it's also unnecessarily cruel. It shouldn't be in a civilized country. So let's make sure all Christians know about this. Pamphlets, tracts, door drops, social media stuff. Let's work with politicians. I know Rupert Lowe, for example, in the UK, a member of parliament, is currently very motivated about this. He tweets about this all the time. So contact him and encourage him and ask how you can get involved in this. Write to your local MP and demand that they raise this in parliament. This is an achievable target for us. And here's the key. Here's the clever part. Get halal meat banned in the UK, and suddenly the UK is a much less attractive place for Muslims to live. In fact, many have already said, I think the Muslim Council of Britain have already said, many will leave the UK if they can't get halal meat. So let's work on this. Similarly, first cousin marriage is currently allowable under UK law. This is a common practice of Muslims, and because of incest, it's having devastating consequences in terms of malformations and disease and IQ. It's an obvious, indefensible practice which should be outlawed in all civilized societies. The science is clear about this, all of the damage it's causing to the next generation. So let's get the wheels in motion on this to get this banned in the UK. It should be an open door, really, that we're pushing at. Another one is shutting down Sharia courts. Do we have lawyers out there, Christian lawyers, who can demonstrate the illegality of running parallel legal systems within Western nations? So a society for banning halal slaughter, a society for banning first cousin marriage, a society for banning Sharia. How about a society that works on rallying Christians and patriots to boycott companies that have funded or promoted LGBTQ doctrine? Can we get researchers to put a list together which is easily accessible so everyone knows Those are the companies we're hitting in the pocket. A team that highlights Christian persecution, perhaps. That gets ignored in legacy media. I mean, have you heard about the stuff that's going on in Nigeria right now? There's a genuine genocide going on in Nigeria that nobody's talking about. Everyone will have heard of Agenda 2030 by now, I presume. So in the next 4 years, there's going to be a lot of chaos as the globalists make a big push to try to push digital IDs and CBDCs and all the infrastructure they're going to need for their agenda. And people like Bill Gates messing about with the food chain. Whatever it is, there's a lot coming in the next 4 years. But whatever you can see in your society, the goal is, the plan here is just mobilize on that thing. Put a team together and mobilize on it and network and try and get as many people together as you can to try and effect change in that area. As Christians, we come from a long heritage of reformers, as I hope this video has shown. People who didn't stand idly by, but who did instruct ignorance and redressed wrongs and supplied want and alleviated misery. That is what we do as Christians. We reform society, and now is our time to do the same in our age. So let's get to work. We have to at least try. When we get to the end of our lives and stand before God, we have to be able to say, we at least tried. We at least tried to use the time and the resources and the gifts that God gave us for his kingdom. We've got to at least try. So let's organize and mobilize, and let's get to it. If this video sparked anything in anyone, if you have any ideas, then feel free to get in touch. We have to try something. Times are getting urgent.